Good evening. So I'm going to talk about peace and diplomacy and how we change from war to talking and dialogue. Can you? Thank you. Okay. The segment. I forgot. This picture is the creation of UN, United Nations. So I think it was really nice to put up. Okay. So one day I wanted to go to a party. So I, party with my friends, with food and my boyfriend and stuff. And I asked my mom if I could do it, if I could go to the party. And she said no, that I couldn't go. And that led me to an interesting question. I started thinking, well, what can I do now? She didn't let me go, even though I wanted to. Well, I have two ways of approaching the situation. I could just start kicking her in the leg and punching her arm while desperately crying, or I could just talk to her and try to convince her to let me go to the party. And then this interesting thought just comes to my mind. Well, of course I won't beat her. She's my mom, I love her very much. But is this the only reason why I knew that violence wouldn't work? No, of course not. The example I just gave demonstrates how much we recognize the power of dialogue and exert diplomatic skills on our daily life. And that's what I want to talk about today, diplomacy. And to be more specific, talk about the change from war to talking while answering three questions. How does this transition happen? Well, how we change to war to talking. And why does this transition happen? And the most important of all, why is it better? Okay. So we have the three questions here. Thank you. So how does this happen? How did this happen? Well, first of all, it's necessary to say that this transition wasn't something that happened suddenly, all at once. Oh, one day we're fighting and the other one are friends and we're just talking. No. Believe it or not, the first diplomatic interactions date more than 3,000 years before Christ, but wars kept happening quite frequently anyways. Diplomatic dialogues, as we know today, only became internationally popularized after World War I. And even though we still had another one, or war after that. So in the hopes of stopping such a deadly conflict from happening again, nations decided to relinquish to what they called old politics, which includes secret treaties and bilateral agreements like the one that Italy signed so that she would exchange the side during World War I. Do you remember this? To shape a whole different way of dealing with international conflicts, something that was concretized with the League of Nations. No, the League of Nations didn't work because we had a second war, but still, this was a visionary project that Woodrow Wilson proposed, and because it was the first one to really think about an organization to maintain world peace. It was a really pioneering project at the time. Why did this happen? It was a really cool fountain that's not there anymore. So, why did this happen? As I said, diplomatic dialogues weren't something that people decided to be useful or really needed all of a sudden. And that is because of a simple reason. Diplomacy simply didn't match the objectives and goals of previous civilizations. I mean, can you imagine the Roman Empire taking over the entire European continent just by asking, hey, can I pick up some lands here, maybe destroy your culture? Or maybe Hitler in the World War II, arriving in Poland, looking around and saying, nice country, what about we making a deal where I conquer you and we were dominated for several decades. What do you think about that? So, my point is that contemporary thinking and ideals are shaped in a way that diplomacy becomes the only acceptable solution, aspects that in previous civilizations weren't. Most of the nations of the present day world have to respect human rights and must consider international law before making an international decision, just because we know that that's the right thing to do. And that mentality was only achieved after several centuries of war. Now, we must talk and deliberate before taking any combative actions, because in the 21st century, that's how it works. Our thinking is shaped to really know that the things must happen that way. We must have peace, We can't think that we can conquer countries and every other stuff just getting there. You know, doesn't belong to our mentality anymore. And last but not least, the most important question to be answered: why is diplomacy better than fighting? Although the answer might seem obvious, it is not that simple. If it were, conflicts like the ones that are happening in Syria, Yemen, or Russia and Crimea wouldn't exist at all. Of course, that we have a clear answer. In war, people die. In diplomacy, we have dialogues and coffee and cupcakes and everything really pretty. But the most important of all, through dialogue, the likelihood of making a decision that respects human rights, is ethical, and doesn't damage innocent lives is higher, because those decisions are taken in a controlled and calm environment, where all parts are allegedly trying to come to a resolution and consequences are carefully thought and discussed. Something that is harder to be made in a state of war. Diplomacy isn't always perfect. We still have espionage, wars, diplomatic crises, and all. But the message that I want to leave after all of this is that through talking and diplomacy, humanity can exert its main characteristics, such as rationality.